Okay, so something completely different, cryptography and policy. There is many things I could talk about the fact that the EU can't agree on policy and that more or less they prefer that the Americans take decisions. So the EU funds the research on cryptographic standards and ideas, and then the Americans, NIST makes the decisions. You heard about AES, and you heard about post-quantum, about ML-Chem, and so on, all NIST standards. But I will not talk about that. I will actually talk more about what you see in this AI-generated picture about access by law enforcement to data, because that's actually a very hot topic these days. And as I will show you, it's a very long hot topic since quite a while. So I show you this slide. So more or less until 1975, there was the prehistory. Then we got public key. Then we got cryptography in software. And then thanks to Snowden, we got actually mass cryptography. We actually got WhatsApp end-to-end encryption, 700 million TLS servers, and so on. So that's where we are. And as long as cryptography was in hardware, it could be controlled by governments, because you can physically control hardware, you can export control it. And also it was anyway too expensive for the average citizen to have such a device, because a single device was typically 3, 5, 10,000 euros in current prices. So it was only for banks, military, and government. So when Diffie and Hellman published their paper, or when they started working on this topic, many people told them, you're crazy. Why do you want to work on a topic which you will run into trouble with the government? But with Diffie is quite stubborn, and Marty Hellman as well. But actually, several people in the US received letters from the NSA that, like, you know, can you please stop your research? The RSA people actually got a letter from an individual NSA employee saying that publishing this work will damage the national security interest of the US. Can you please not publish it? And their response was to make as many copies as possible and send it out everywhere. But there is also people like the late George Davida, who worked on block ciphers, and he was actually also told to stop working on this, and in the end he got no funding, so he had to do something else. What most people don't know is the same thing happened in the EU. So when I started as a PhD student, my professor, Joost van der Walle, wrote an application together with David Schaum, you've seen before, and some other people. Siemens was there, KPN in the Netherlands, Philips Crypto, for a cryptographic project for evaluations. And this project got very high ratings, and then was stopped by Secret Services. So the people in charge had to go to Brussels to meet people in long raincoats and with big cars with dark windows. And they were told, we're going to stop your project because you're harming our national security interests. At the commission, there was a guy called Mr. Ott, and he was very helpful, and he led the negotiations. In the end, we could work on cryptography, but not on encryption, so only on authentication of data and entities. And this gave rise to the RIPE project. So RIPE, the R stands for race, and race was the name of the program, like now Horizon 20. And then RIPE stands for Race Integrity Primitives Evaluations, because we could not work on confidentiality, and authentication would have been better, but then the name would have been a bit difficult as acronym. So this is why we have RIPE. And this gives actually rise to RIPE MD 160, which is still used by Bitcoin, for example. So this is also in Europe. And then, so I was involved in this project as a researcher. And then when, as a young postdoc, I went to deliver the results to the commission. I was led into the office of a GCHQ officer who was delegated to Brussels. And he said to me, Mr. Preneel, this was a big mistake. The EU will never, ever fund research on cryptography. You can go now. And luckily, I had also a friend, Gordon Lennox, there, and we went outside, and he talked and he explained me more. But more or less, that's what happened. So I went to the US, and I started working in communications. But then in '99, export controls changed, and I submitted a new project for cryptographic evaluations, but I thought it would never be accepted, so I called it Nessie, like the monster of Loch Ness. But I was actually wrong, because actually it was funded. But even today, I know researchers who tell me, I do this work with you. If I go back to my home country, I will have trouble doing this research. And this is European countries. I'm not even speaking of other countries. The second crypto war was happening when I was living in the US. So the time of Bill Clinton. So what happened is AT&T proposed an end-to-end encrypted phone using triple dash for business people, so kind of a big plug-in device that business people could actually carry on trips, or they could use it for have secure phone calls. And the US government said, no, this is actually bad. It will help organized crime. We have to stop this. And they proposed their own secure phone solution. By the way, the US government had for their own purpose a secure phone already, the STU phones, using Diffie-Hellman in the 80s, late 80s. But so they proposed a commercial version of that, the Clipper chip, with key escrow, so the government would have a copy of the keys. And so, of course, academia was against this, industry was against this, the NGOs were against this. And then some researchers found also flaws in the design because the algorithm was secret. And so the Clipper chip was sunk, and we were very proud because we thought we won the crypto war. Little did we know, so of course, immediately after, the FBI pushed for the Communication Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, so that would actually give them access to all communications if needed. And this was later extended to VoIP. Also, if you make a call with your phone, even today in 5G, it's not end-to-end encrypted. And there is since 3G a law enforcement interface. Okay, so it went further. So Europe also actually had a council resolution on lawful interception. 3G added this as a feature. And then Europe improved or added data retention, which means that all metadata has to be collected and stored depending on the member state between 6 months and 2 years. Now, metadata is the elephant in the room. It's not the content of your call or your communication, but it's who you're emailing to, who you're calling, and with your mobile devices, where you are. So they also know who is in the same room as you, and which websites you visit. So in fact, metadata is highly intrusive as well. So the highest European court has said, in fact, a directive means there is always a national implementation. And so the highest European court has said in a request for answer from many national courts, data retention directive is illegal because storing all information about everybody, because some of us are criminals, is actually not proportional. Okay. So then I got calls from the Belgian government, say, can you help us? We are brainstorming on some ideas. And I said, do you think I'm going to help you with this thing? So they found a solution. So there is a new law in Belgium, and I guess other member states have done the same thing. So in Belgium, you no longer are allowed to collect all metadata, only if you're within 1 kilometer of a hospital, a school, a station, an airport, a police officer, a prison. And that's all secure zones. And there you can do data retention, but in the middle of the Ardennes, where there is no reception for 3G, there you can actually not do data retention. And so, of course, somebody will go to the European Court, and the European Court will say, you're nuts. But that takes 5 years. So for now, we have, again, a regime where everything is collected about everybody. So the third case came after Snowden. So, as I said, cryptography became software and became used in browsers. But in the beginning, in the 90s, it was also for Europeans 40-bit keys, export control. But export controls were lifted in 99. By the way, luckily it was the case because the AES competition was won by Vincent and Johan. And when the competition started in 97 and you had to ask a CD with all submissions, you had to ask for the export license as a researcher to be able to get the description and the code of the algorithms. Okay, so it would not have changed the law. Then Vincent and Johan, who flew to Washington, D.C. to pick up their plaque, they would have actually broken the law when they flew back with AES on their laptop. It would have been really ridiculous that the inventors of AES would be arrested for exporting their own algorithm from the US. So this is why I think it was one of the things that made them realize that maybe it doesn't make sense to export control these things. Of course, there was also a big lobby from the industry. Microsoft was not happy with the fact that they could not export strong crypto everywhere. But so Snowden gave a really big impulse to more cryptography, end-to-end encryption, 700 million web servers now. So, and we know from Snowden documents that the NSA anyway has access to everything. They backdoored random number generators, they intercept everything. They have these techniques called quantum insertion, where if you make a request for a Google page, they answer before Google. And in the answer, there is malware that takes over your device. And then later the real response from Google comes, but your PC will describe it, which Google already answered. It's called quantum insertion. Okay, so the NSA doesn't need to get access to encryption because they have control of your machine anyway if they want. But the FBI was complaining. And so the FBI was waiting for a good case, but they were complaining for a while. So Comey, later fired by Trump, actually said, this backdoor thing, we don't want this anymore, we want front door access. We're familiar with the legal process, court orders and so on, but if there is a court order, we want to have full access, full front door access. You have Cameron in the UK, one of their best prime ministers ever. So he actually said around this debate in our country, do we want to allow a means of communication between people which we cannot read? So you can also translate this as, should we allow people to have curtains? Because it means that police cannot see it when you're beating up your spouse. Right? It's the same kind of question. And so he approved the Snoopers Charter or the Investigatory Power Act, and we will come back to this at the end. So, in fact, the former directors of NSA and the Department of Homeland Security directors actually are against key escrow and are against backdoor encryption. They say our nation needs strong encryption because we actually are more dependent on cryptography. We need strong encryption everywhere to protect ourselves against the rest of the world. And anyway, they say, and we're the NSA, so we get access to what we want anyway. So this backdoor stuff, you know, the FBI wants this, but we don't think this is necessary, and it's actually harmful. So then comes the Apple versus FBI case. Okay, so what happens? A terrorist kills something like 17 people in San Bernardino. He was actually a US government employee. He had destroyed all his devices except for his US government-issued iPhone. And so it's clear that this guy did not have much sympathy. Nobody would defend him. So the FBI actually went to Apple and said, give us access to this iPhone. Okay. They used a law from 1789 about iPhones, the old Ritz order, which more or less says that, well, the old Ritz order says that you have to do everything in your means to help the Department of Justice or the FBI. Of course, what Apple said, no, because if we give you access to this phone, more or less, we have to give you access to the phones of everybody, and all the law enforcement officers will show up. There was a very long rebuttal by Apple. Any iPhone users here? It feels good, right? Apple defends you against the FBI. Apple gives all data to the NSA, but that's a small detail, right? That's another thing. They can't talk about that, but that they do, but not the FBI. The NSA gets your data, but not the FBI. They're very good for you. Okay, so what happened is actually the argument of Apple was, well, okay, you're the FBI, but of course, there is many other governments in the world. There is probably 10,000 law enforcement agencies. Also, hackers will use this interface. Other nations will use this interface. This is going to harm human rights activists, journalists. Trade secrets will be leaked like this. Critical infrastructure. This is really, we should not do this kind of thing. It is really bad. So pay attention. So first it was publishing research, and academics were the bad guys. Then it was communications access, and it was organized crime. And now it's stored data access and terrorists. So the wars keep changing shape, but the same story is that law enforcement wants access. So I guess FBI dropped the case. They paid an Israeli company an undisclosed amount, but the rumors are $900,000 to get access to the iPhone. They managed to do that, and they found no information. And then a bit later, a researcher in Cambridge actually showed that for $100 equipment, you can do the same thing. So the FBI overpaid a bit. But the FBI dropped several other lawsuits. They had several other lawsuits for drug dealers, not for terrorists. And they also dropped all of them, so more or less they kind of gave up. But also in Australia down under, actually they advocate for this. And so their prime minister, Malcolm Turnbull, made the famous quote, "The laws of mathematics do not apply in Australia." So, which I think cryptographers find very funny. But then actually in December 8, 2018, he voted a law which more or less gives the government the power to force providers to put backdoors in stuff. Okay, so it's interesting. So you have the 5 Eyes, okay, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and UK. So the US, you have the 4th Amendment, so you can't actually, as government FBI, You can't search devices in an unreasonable way. So what the Five Eyes do is US pressures UK and Australia to get these things, and then with those things in hand, they come to Europe and say, and you should do not the same thing. So this is the strategy that's being played. So it's not surprising that both Australia and UK have these kind of things. But the pressure kept increasing after this case. So for example, the Department of Justice kept saying, this is during Trump times, word-proof encryption defeats the Constitution. What you do, you guys, cryptographers, you build irresponsible encryption, you should build responsible encryption. So you're actually irresponsible people because what you do cannot be decrypted by us. So their argument is, well, we have to protect society. There is also the fundamental right of security. And we always had warrants. And so it's not because there is new technology that should change. If we want access, we should get it. That is their argument, very simple argument. But in fact, if you then ask for real numbers in how many cases they couldn't do their job, there is actually, you don't get many data. And this debate has been happening since the early 90s. And the other side, I would say my side, academia side, we ask for data and there is never data. And then once after the FBI versus Apple case, the FBI gave data and said in 1 year, 2018, we had 7,800 logged phones in investigations. And then a bit later, they had to admit that this number was made up and it was much less. There is just no data, right? That's the reality of you have a debate, but the other side never gives you their data. What we do know is that, of course, there is ways to get, for example, access to WhatsApp, because you can, of course, use things like NSO group, Pegasus. You can actually hack the device. And also police forces are doing this. They're buying this stuff. Or you can go to Meta, and many people make backups of their messages in case they have to buy a new phone or their phone breaks. Then they can just log in again and get all their old messages. So in that case, of course, Meta has all the data. So in fact, an organized crime plus, of course, Meta has all the metadata. The name is very appropriate. So they collect all the metadata of your communications. So in fact, if the police finds a drug dealer, then they can use metadata analysis on WhatsApp to find out who the network is, and they can this way find the bosses. So organized crime knew this. They should have asked me for advice, but they didn't. So they made their own systems. Very, very dumb. So they had systems like Phantom Secure, which was based on BlackBerry. Then they had Anom, which is interesting, was a system made by the FBI. Super secure phones, very expensive. It was actually run by the FBI. And then in Europe, you had EncroChat and SkyECC, and then later on you had Exclu. And so these are all super secure phones. They typically cost, they're just normal Android phones with some small changes to it, and some hardening, and some maybe a fake boot or so. But in general, they cost several thousand euros, and a subscription costs like 500 euro per month. And so what happened, at least in the EncroChat and SkyECC case, we know because there have been court cases. So in EncroChat is the French government. In SkyECC, it's claimed to be the Belgian. I think it's Europol, but they can't admit that. So it's probably Europol managed to cryptanalyze some of the messages. So I think a lesson learned for criminals is that don't use such a system, because if you have such a phone, you more or less that's a proof I'm part of the network. So that's very dumb. Okay, I can tell you many other things about dumb things criminals do, because I looked in all the messages at the request of for some legal studies. They do many dumb things. Talk to me afterwards if you want to know. But more or less, it's not a good strategy to have this. But so the message that politicians get from this is, oh, if you break encryption, you can find all the criminals. Because of course, in both the EncroChat and SkyECC case, several thousand people are arrested. Also, interestingly, some police officers were part of the network and were paid by organized crime. Some collaborators, even in the prosecution, were actually caught being part of the network. So it was a very broad network with drug dealing. Also, so several thousand people over Europe have been arrested, but I don't think the price of cocaine has changed in Antwerp. That's just an observation. I don't buy cocaine myself, but this is what I hear from experts, that there was actually no real implication. There's also other things. So for example, if you're prosecuted in Belgium, then the French government says, here are the decryption of your messages. And then the lawyers or the defendant says, and how did you come to this? How did it happen? Where is the plain text, the ciphertext, and the key so we can check? Oh no, that's the secret of the French state. We can't tell you. Here's the plain text. Trust us, they're correct. So you also have problems that, in fact, they can accuse now everybody because somehow they produce plain text and say, well, you sent this plain text and you go to jail for 20 years. So it's actually quite dangerous. And I believe that the European Court will quash some of those convictions, because the French government doesn't want to say how they decrypted stuff. Okay. But so question is, can this be solved? So the next FBI director, Christopher Wray, said more or less, if we can develop self-driving cars, we should be able to design such magic encryption that only breaks if law enforcement looks at it. And the right law enforcement, of course, not the one of Russia, only the one of the US and the ones we like. This was 2018. We still don't have self-driving cars, really, that can drive everywhere, but okay. It's of course not, it's kind of, what a stupid comparison is this, right? They're completely different problems. Already back in the time of the Clipper chip, there was a quite long paper written, and this was updated by a bunch of academics, industry people, and NGO people. It was updated with the title Keys Under Doormats, arguing why you should not give this escrow, more or less. There is already so many security problems, and they haven't even heard of Mythos. So, like, it's so hard to make things secure. If you're going to add backdoors, it's really hopeless. Any intercept capability will be abused. Also by bad actors. So there is many examples since then. So this first prediction was made in the mid-90s, was repeated in 2015. Since then we had the Greek Vodafone incident, where we still don't know who was intercepting the who is who in the Greek society during the Olympics. We have the Juniper incident, in which Juniper had firmware with a backdoor random number generator in there, designed by the NSA, so in which they could actually intercept all communications. And then researchers found out that after a while, this firmware was changed because the backdoor was changed by another backdoor. So probably the Chinese or the Russians put their backdoor in the firmware with a hack on the supply system. And then the next response for Juniper was to put the original backdoor back. And how do we know this? Because, well, all the firmware of these routers is on the internet, and they've been analyzed, and there are scientific papers looking at all this. And what happens? People keep buying Juniper. It doesn't matter. There is a backdoor. It's even taken over by somebody else. Just put the original one back and claim nothing happened. So it's very interesting. You also have Salt Typhoon. So this was a lot of noise in the last months of the Biden administration. More or less, the Americans discovered that all their telco systems were actually hacked by the Chinese. And what they used was the law enforcement interface. So Biden actually, one of his last executive orders was advocating post-quantum cryptography, but also forbade any US government employee to use the phone system for government business. In Europe, nothing happened. We don't know anything. They only hacked the US. They've never hacked Europe. They never misused the law. We don't know about misuse the law enforcement interface. No, in Europe, this doesn't happen. It's only the Americans they go. I mean, it's so more or less what researchers have been saying. If you don't have end-to-end encrypted calls, you have an interface where somebody can get the data. The bad side will get this too. Don't do this. But whatever. It's still, these people don't want to believe it. Also, has been a Cisco case, but I don't have time to discuss them all. The real criminals will, of course, use SkyECC or EncroChat, but this is very dumb. I can tell them what to do, but I'm not going to make that in a recording, but there is many tricks to use WhatsApp, not be interceptable, and not stand out, okay? And in one word, it's called secondography. That's what they really should be doing, and there are no good tools, but if you want to make money, I think the reason why you shouldn't do it is something I learned now, a legal thing. So, for example, the provider of SkyECC phones, he was actually put in jail because there is a law that says that if you build a service and you know it's for criminal purposes, even if the service can also be used for good things, then you actually can also go to jail. So I don't recommend you to build a tool for this, but I think at some moment organized crime will find out what to do. They will not use a system where they know the government has access, okay? There is also technical arguments. I will skip them here. So more or less what we keep saying as academics, like encryption is like being pregnant. You can't be a little bit pregnant. You're pregnant or not pregnant. It's secure or not secured. You can't be a little bit secured or a little bit end-to-end encrypted, but not quite. It just doesn't exist. Okay. And of course, the response of law enforcement is it's because you didn't try hard enough. Okay. But the problem is you can never prove you tried hard enough. What is trying hard enough? Okay. So People did try. There were proposals around the Clipper chip time of giving only part of your key so the government to do a key search. This was rediscovered after the FBI incident, more or less the same idea with a different twist. There were several people going around like Ray Ozzie, Stephen Savage, Ernie Brickell, and Robert Thibodeau, all after the Apple versus FBI incident, claiming they could solve all these problems. But I think the only one that has a bit of realism, that is actually details, all the rest is just claims, that has details is the paper by Savage, and this is about access to stored devices. Okay, that's actually the easiest problem is access on a stored device in the hands of the police. So that's actually harder to abuse for mass surveillance because you first have to have the device. I'm still not a big fan of this because it also means that if you take your device and you cross any border, they have access to your device. And the law enforcement office there can actually also decrypt your stuff. So, but at least it's the only case where I think we may come up with a solution or a case. But of course, then criminals will know that they should not put any stuff on a normal phone because if it will be confiscated, they will find it, right? That's... So, more or less, the debate shifted, and I think finally politicians have found a winning case. And so this is the fourth crypto war. So again, remember, academics, organized crime, terrorists, now the pedophiles. You know, if you really want to break encryption, this is for the pedophiles. Everybody will be agreeing that we can't have pedophiles, these are bad, and we should not have encryption because pedophiles use encryption. So in fact, there is techniques for removing illegal content. We were invented in about 25 years ago. Most of you are too young to remember, but at some moment the music industry got almost wiped out by MP3s and Napster. So people, instead of buying CDs, were sharing stuff online. And then the media industry said, we're not going to put our videos, our movies online unless you have a lot of measures. And one of these measures was copyright violation detection. And so all the big tech players where you upload stuff, the TikToks, the Flickrs, the Facebook, all the social media, they have these filters in which you can detect copyrighted content, but also terrorist content being uploaded. Okay, so, but this is already being done for a lot of time, but it's actually, it seems that politicians have understood, and also law enforcement, and particularly Europol, that an argument that goes much better is if you actually say, well, what about abused children? So the focus in the last 4 or 5 years has been CSAM. CSAM is an abbreviation of child sexual abuse material. So the argument is this is going up. We keep detecting more and more of this. Of course, you don't know whether there is actually more pedophiles or maybe there is more idiots who actually somehow stumble on such a picture and send it to 7 of their friends and say, look what a horrible picture I found. This is illegal, right? Don't do this. But there is so many dumb people that it's not so surprising that hundreds of thousands of people do this kind of stuff. And if you then, what are you going to do if you investigate those people, right? There is clear statistics. For example, the Irish police showed that if they got 600 reports, it ended up in 2 prosecutions. So that's a very big problem, that finding the real guys is much harder than just filtering and saying who's sending these things, because somebody who does this once or spreads this to 5 friends and says, look what a horrible picture. I mean, you can't put them in jail, right? Maybe you should give them a lecture about how to behave responsibly. You can't put them in jail. But there is a very strong lobby in the US called NCMEC. There is a not-for-profit by some movie star, although in the Kushner, I think, but then he was actually later, he had to resign there because he was defending one of his friends who was actually accused of child abuse or sexual abuse. So they're not really angels either, Torn. And in Belgium, you have Child Focus also very strongly lobbying. So what is the idea? So you have a database with illegal images. If an image is being uploaded or posted, what you do is you send it to the database and you say, is this in the database? And then the answer is yes or no. And if it's in the database, then of course it's illegal and you will not upload it, you will block it. That's the idea. Database is huge, and of course you have to send all these images in the clear, which is not so nice. So the idea is we will just hash those images, right? So you will hash them with the graphic hash function, and then you just hash your image before uploading it, and you upload the hash. And then you check in the database. The database is much smaller because it's just hash values of 20 bytes instead of images of say 7 megabytes, and then you can again check is the image in the database or not. So this is more privacy preserving because you also don't have to reveal your image. You only have to reveal the hash of your image. You would think this is soft, but of course it's not, because I took a picture of the internet and I made somewhere here a small gray dot, and I recomputed the hash and I get a completely different value. So you can actually modify your image. You change 1 pixel in a cryptographic hash, the values are different. So you can now upload this and you can't keep track of this. So this problem was solved for copyright and was called perceptual hash function. So the idea is that if 2 images look about the same, then they should have about the same hash. Either the same hash or a hash that doesn't differ in many bits, or a certain distance measure like Euclidean distance or something like this. So if you change the brightness, the colors, the structure, if you rotate it a bit, if you compress it, if you add noise, all these things should not change the hash. And can we do this? The short answer is no. We have some cabinet functions, but you can imagine that there is so many operations you can do and combine to change an image, and all those should actually preserve the hash, which is really a very, very hard problem. Okay, so, but that's what's being done. So of course now then you just hash with perceptual hash. You have a database of perceptual hashes, and then you check is the hash in the database or is it similar to one in the database, and if it's not, then you're allowed to do it. So this is the same principle, but now with a different hash. I'll skip the security properties because we don't have time for this, but more or less you can look at the slides later. So we have the formal definitions of this because we're one of the first ones to formally study this, and you'll see in a moment why. But so more or less, in 2007, YouTube used Content ID. 2009, Farid designed PhotoDNA together with Microsoft, and he gave it to Microsoft 2009, and then was a German guy who wrote a thesis, p-hash. And then Microsoft started deploying together with NACMAC PhotoDNA 2014. In 2016, Farid designed eClip for YouTube, for videos. Then Facebook at the time, now called Meta, designed PDQ and for images, and then TMK PDQF for videos. And then 2021, Apple published Neural Hash. So you can see it, hopefully the colors are not great. On my screen it looks better, but some of the designs are open, but most of them are secret. So something else that you do is you keep these hash functions secret. So we don't think actually they're very secure, but it's go back to security by obscurity. If you don't know how it works, it may be hard to break. And in fact, if you look at this, maybe my picture is not very clear here, but if this is a service provider, if this is Meta or WhatsApp, they see the image, but in any case, only the big service providers have to have the hash function. The end user doesn't have to have the hash function because he or she uploads the image in clear or the video in clear, and then the hashing happens at the server, and then the matching happens at the server, and then the decision is made there. So, in fact, this is how PhotoDNA could remain secret for a very long time because, in fact, it doesn't have to be on your device. Okay, so where are we next? So, yes.
Do any of these perceptual hash functions work?
Sorry?
Do any of the solutions you looked at in the previous slide work?
No, I will show you that they don't work. So, this works for copyright detection. By the way, it's also done on large scale for terrorist content detection. So like if you post pictures with ISIS flags, they will also be flagged and not spread. So this works on a large scale. But now comes the problem. You know what? The pedophile uses WhatsApp. And WhatsApp has end-to-end encryption. And then you can't hash the image on the server anymore because the server doesn't have the image. Right? So what to do? Well, Apple thought about this problem. And they made an announcement in 2021. They were trying to help law enforcement. They say, we have a fantastic idea called multi-party computation. And we're going to make a computation between your iPhone and our cloud server. And we're going to check all your photos in your database or on your phone and check whether there is an intersection with the illegal content. And if this intersection is large enough, they don't want to say what large enough is, then we will report you to law enforcement. That sounds like a fantastic idea. Okay. And they even got Dan Bonnet to help them with the math. So it's a beautiful math paper, like, you know, a potentially massive scale application of multi-party computation, two-party computation. And it's a beautiful paper. But if you do this, you can't do a multi-byte computation with an image. You have to actually do a hash of the image, because otherwise I just change my image a bit. So in fact, Apple had to make a perceptual hash function, neural hash. And so this has to be public because it has to be in every user phone. How long can you keep a function secret that's in every user phone? I will tell you, less than 24 hours. Okay? So Apple published the neural hash, and within 2 weeks, people showed that the following two pictures collide on the neural hash. Okay, so you can imagine this is CSAM, and this is a picture of a dog, and they have the same hash. It's in fact not even rocket science. It's very cool research. The research required several hours of computation on expensive GPUs. But if you've been paying attention in Tim's lecture on Monday, it's 96-bit results. So with 2 to the 48 effort, you could also find collisions. And there are many other papers showing that neural hash really sucks. But actually, people criticize the proposal because the problem is, if you do this for CSAM, you can live with this. But what if then a government, say Orban's government, adds pictures, memes critical of Orban? Or what if some dictator somewhere in the Middle East adds pictures critical of, or memes critical of the government? Then also you actually report these people. They can use the same infrastructure to find their political enemies, to find human rights activists, and so on. So actually, Apple was shamed into withdrawing their proposal. And very surprisingly, even a year later, they explained why they did this. They gave exactly this argument that this infrastructure would become a global infrastructure for surveillance and finding dissidents. And we can't roll this out on iPhone. This is against our culture. So Apple did something really nice. By the way, if you're an iPhone user, there is still a version of neural hash on your device. And it has been updated a few years ago. And they don't want to say what they use it for. But apparently it's not CSAM, if you believe Apple. So the commission was pushed by NCMEC and by others, and also inspired by Apple. So the commission said, oh, Apple can solve this problem. So we're going to force everybody to detect CSAM. Now, you should be aware that in Europe, there is a regulation called e-privacy. Well, it's a directive, e-privacy, which says in a very short sentence, nobody can look into communications. That's e-privacy. It actually makes sense. Communications are private, very simple. So what the commission says is, yeah, they're private, but we're going to make an exception for CSAM. If you search for CSAM, we can do it. And if it's end-to-end encrypted, we're not going to tell you what to do, but guess what? Client-side scanning is a fantastic idea. You can actually, we don't impose a rule, but the only way we see is client-side scanning. Every time somebody sends a picture, you're going to hash it against a database in your phone, and then if it's there, you will report this person to law enforcement. That was more or less what the commission proposed. But they were more ambitious, because with this, you can only detect known CSAM. So they were only going to use AI on your device to detect new CSAM. And they were also going to detect with AI grooming conversations. Grooming means when an older person convinces a child to, for example, make pictures when they're naked or come to a certain place and whatever. And so this gave the name to the opponents called, therefore, this regulation proposal chat control. The commission is going to look in your chats and try to detect, is it grooming or not? Okay? So that's more or less what happened. So end-to-end encryption means it has to be done with client-side scanning, and so that would be mandatory. Okay, this is gave the name chat control. I think I mentioned those things. And also, by the way, if we have time, I'll discuss this. Also, what was added was age verification and assessment, because once you're protecting the children, you also want to protect them against all the other bad things on the internet, such as adult sites, but also addictive social media and so on. So now in France, Spain, but also in Brussels, all politicians believe that you should check everybody's age on the internet. It doesn't work, but that doesn't matter. We're going to do it anyway. Okay, so I will show you now it doesn't work. We have no way to do this. So to answer your question, all these hash functions we have today don't work at all. It will be abused for function creep, for terrorist organized crime, more or less. And we've seen these kind of abuses in the COVID times, right? When bars had to collect phone numbers of people who came to the bar, then the bartenders used it to actually afterwards approach some women they saw in the bar. In Singapore and Australia, this COVID data was used to solve crimes. Oh, but it's a murder. We have to go to all this medical data because it's a murder. And so I guess there's lots of less democratic countries that would love to have such a tool in which they can in real time detect who has content the government does not like on their device. And it would be reported. So this is the main arguments. The other arguments is that it will reduce security because you make it complex. It also turns out that teenagers send these kind of sexting pictures, and it's a large percentage. I don't know nothing about this. I'm too old for that. But there seems to be also a chilling effect on them. And then the lawyers say, in general, it's not proportional. Just like data retention, checking, inspecting everybody all the time is not proportional. By the way, we wrote an impact study for the parliament. If you really want to read a long 150-page document with all the arguments, the ones I tried to summarize here, you can read this, you get the link, you can read this document of 150 pages, arguing why this is a bad idea. I have a nice anecdote. We went to present this report in the parliament, and the chair was actually in favor of the proposal, so he said, this is the worst report I've ever seen. But anyway, I have to give you time, so now you can present it. And then the commission came, somebody from the commission, was a French diplomat, and he said, I have not read her report, but I have the following comments. Some members of parliament were not so happy. But okay, that's what politics does, right? I mean, it's kind of a lot of theater. But good, more or less what happened then, the parliament voted no, said we don't want mandatory client-side scanning, but Europe is very complex, the commission makes a proposal, the parliament has to vote, and then the member states can agree on a counter-proposal. And the member states have been trying to agree for 2 years. And so we've been writing open letters because all these times there were leaked proposals because the member states don't have to publish what they do. But the proposals leaked because some member states were unhappy. And most proposals were dumber than the previous one. Okay, they were always changing details. For example, a Belgian invention was we're going to separate all services into normal services and high risk for CSAM services. What is high risk for CSAM? You can send images. There are many users, and you can send chat. Which applications would be actually high risk? Any application. But only this chat control is only for high risk, not for normal application, only high risk application. I mean, this is kind of something lawyers can only invent, right? Only lawyers can invent something like this. So, but the parliament said no, and the member states actually had many fights. Then Denmark came with a horrible proposal, and then in the end they compromised, and the compromise said that you can, the member state compromise is you can do optional client-side scanning, voluntary scanning, which I think is still a bad idea because now the commission can go to Meta and say, we have the following 7 lawsuits against you. If you're doing now voluntary scanning, we're going to drop the following 3. And there you are as a citizen, you have nothing to say in the decision. So it's a very risky thing. In the meantime, if you don't use end-to-end encryption, everybody is still scanning for CSAM, okay? Because the parliament has voted a temporary derogation 4 or 5 years ago, that for 2 years you could keep scanning for CSAM in unencrypted communications. And then 2 years ago, the parliament extended this. And then this year, the commission came to the parliament and say, can you please extend it again because we're not ready with this stuff? And the parliament said, no. Temporary is temporary. 6 years is not temporary. 4 years is temporary, 6 years is not. What did the commission do? They came back a month later and said, we think last time you made a mistake when voting. Can you please vote again? Did the parliament do? They voted no. There was only 1 vote left in the majority to, well, in the opposition actually, to vote against. But so now actually today, at this date, it's forbidden for Meta to scan for CSAM, which I think is also bad, right? But I think the parliament is so upset with the commission and member states that they just said, now you can't scan anything anymore. So now what's happening is the member states, the parliament and the commission are negotiating. And when I talk to people who have leaks, it seems that voluntary scanning will remain part of it. And also the chat control and the new CSAM, it will be not mandatory, but it will be on the agenda for the future. So once it's possible, we can do it. Okay, so if you read the FAQ of, I'm now going to go back to the point, do these things work? So if you read the FAQ of neural hash, will CSAM detection in iCloud photos falsely report innocent people to law enforcement? The answer is no. We will see 1 error, 1 in a trillion per year, or 1 error per 1 trillion years. So, of course, you saw the pictures I showed you. If you send the dog picture, and this child pictures in the database, then you actually will be triggered. So in fact, it disproves this. But we have an idea. What if we just try with random images and see whether we can make them match? Okay. And so we don't even have to know how it works. We just try to attack it without knowing how it works. It actually works for all the functions. So we know that there is something like 20 million images by NECMEC. We heard that more recently Thorn seems to have 124 million. Okay. And we know that an average EU citizen 7 years ago made 597 selfies per year. It's not me. I only take like 5 or 6 per year or so, but the average citizen, 600 per year. And so what we did is we just looked at, you take images, in this case pictures of celebrities, and you hash them and you look whether the output is random or not. And the point is, these outputs, if you take people as an input, if you take random pictures of mountains, cars, houses, people, then you get random outputs. But if you put only people, you get actually very, very structured outputs. And so you get actually many hash values have like bits that are biased at always 0 or almost always 1 and that are correlated. So we did some statistics together with Diane Albert-Leblanc. So we show that if you would use neural hash at EU scale and you would report a citizen for 1 false positive, you would have to report more than the EU population per year just based on their selfies. If you had a threshold of 3, it's only France, Germany, and Poland you would report. And if you would have a threshold of 8, it's the population of Brussels. And if it's 10, it's adult population of Leuven. So it just doesn't work. Okay, but this is 1 in 1 trillion? No. In fact, you will report the whole EU population. And this attack doesn't require any knowledge of how the function works. So it works for all the other functions as well. Okay, so this paper will be presented at Usenix this summer. And I'm very lucky. I just got the news. In Usenix, you either get 3 minutes or 12 minutes. And I got 12. Fly to the US for 12 minutes and back. Great. Okay, so what about PhotoDNA white box? So we somehow figured out how PhotoDNA works. PhotoDNA was leaked on GitHub, but nobody understood how it works. And with methods I can't reveal because it's recorded, we actually managed to figure out how it works. So we actually know how it works. And we have a brilliant student, Maxime, who's sitting there. He actually managed to figure it out completely, to reproduce code for PhotoDNA. Okay. And so he found amazing attacks. So for example, here is an original picture, and here is all modified pictures that have a different hash. And by the way, neural hash is 96 bits. PhotoDNA is 144 bytes. So it's a lot harder to break because it's more than 1,000 bits. And so more or less, if this is a forbidden image, all those images would evade detection. Same thing for this watch. And he doesn't need GPUs and hours of calculation. He does this all on a laptop in something like a minute or so. The famous COSIC laptops in which we break stuff, not even on a weekend, on a minute. Okay. This, I think, is the most beautiful attack. So what Maxime found is that if you take a picture and you put a frame around it, you can no longer detect it. There is no pedophile that can ever do that. It's too difficult. So we reported this to Microsoft in September, and we made this news only public in March. So we hope that they fixed it by now. This is something you can fix, okay? And I hope they fixed it. But it just shows you nobody had ever bothered to ever do any research on this. Okay, this is, you modify 2 images, random images, and then this is the modified images, and they have the same hash again. So if this is CSAM, yeah, there is of course a problem with our research. We can't use real CSAM because having CSAM is forbidden. That's the problem. I also wrote to some of the companies who have CSAM and say, can we give you a script and can you run it on your CSAM? And then we never get an answer. I will look into it, but nobody ever says, they don't even say yes or no. It always ends up in a black box. But I'm also glad we don't have to do research on real CSAM because then you have to look at it the whole day, right? It's a bit annoying. The most cool attack is inverting. So what the software does is you get a hash of 1,000 bits, and this is the original image, and this is how you can reconstruct it. So these functions are not even one way. You can actually see what's in the image. And again, this works with 99% success rate. And it takes like something like 10 seconds to do this. So imagine that client-side scanning would ever happen. You would get a database of 120 million of those images on your devices or hashes, and then you could run our algorithm and you could actually find out what's in those pictures with some noisy things. And Maxime was only working for a couple of months. Probably this can be further improved. Okay, so more examples. So we made a webpage called pseudo-DNA to make fun of photo DNA. And so Microsoft says 1 in 50 billion false positives. The Commission also repeats these things. So 1 in 10 billion or 1 in... Whatever, you make up a number that sounds big to politicians and people believe it. Okay, so 1% false negatives. So we more or less showed that this function fails to achieve all goals it should achieve. The paper is under submission, but it got already quite some media attention. Okay, so the response of Microsoft is this is not a vulnerability. These are known limitations of these functions. And we know that manipulation of images will result in problems. So Microsoft defines putting a frame around your picture as malicious. Be careful what you do on a Microsoft system, because you may go to jail for putting a frame around a picture that you have on a Microsoft machine, because Microsoft defines putting a frame as malicious. Okay, so I'll let you judge yourself whether this is broken or not, but okay. So what can law enforcement do? Well, to start, it's actually a very complex problem. So there is interception of telephony, voice over the old phone, then the mobile phone, there is the voice over IP, then there is data communication, SMS, data sent over 3G, 4G, 5G, metadata of your phone, then devices in the cloud, then USB sticks, then your phone when confiscated, your phone when it's in your hand. So the problem is that they're all different problems, okay? And so for each of them, you have different requirements, a different architecture, and for each of them, I think it will be very bad. So, of course, they can do other stuff, law enforcement. They can use vulnerabilities, and they do this more or less. I'm in a debate with law enforcement, and they say, if you don't give us more access, we use more vulnerabilities. But I think even if they have access, they will still use vulnerabilities, because that is actually much more effective. You could, of course, and this is what they propose, they want to convince manufacturers, for example, to go to Meta and say, this person we want to, or this list of persons should get a malicious version of WhatsApp where we have access. Or what they want to do is say, well, we have all these WhatsApp groups, why don't you add another user to the group that's us? A bit like the Pete Hegseth case, remember, with Signal? So they want to make this a standard for everybody. Fantastic idea. If you think about it for 5 minutes, it's really a terrible idea, of course. So, of course, they can use metadata. They can use AI. They have all these camera images. Belgium now has more than 500,000 cameras, 15,000 NPR, I believe. So they have AI tools. So more or less, they can do a lot. I promised I would come back to the UK. So in fact, in 2022, Apple started rolling out iCloud encryption in the UK. This product was already available in other places. And then the UK government demanded access to encrypted iCloud. They were a bit ambitious, not only of UK users, of the whole world. So they got the US a bit upset. Because more or less the UK was asking for access to all US citizen data from Apple, if they would want it. So Apple responded by withdrawing the service for the UK. And they could do it because not many people were using it, actually. So there was a mistake by Apple. They should have rolled it out sooner. There would have been more uproar. And then the last part is that the UK then required that the court case would be under closed doors. But Apple won this one. So hold the popcorn, there will be a court case in the UK under open doors, where the UK government will come with their arguments why they should get access to all the iCloud data in the whole world, if they choose to do so. So metadata is the big thing. They have a lot of metadata anyway. They know where you are. They know where your phone is. This is how now many murder cases and whatever important thefts, kidnappings are being solved. But of course, it's hard. You have to use your brain. You have to do analysis. It's a lot easier to just listen to people who say, I will bring you whatever 10 kilo of cocaine, or I'm going to open that container in the harbor. It's a lot easier than actually doing metadata analysis and finding the network, right? So that's the debate. As I said, they have face recognition. The Belgian police the minister had to admit a couple of years ago that the Belgian police did not use one, but I think multiple times, Clearview illegally as a test. And the other outcome was it actually didn't work. But so Clearview has scanned all the faces on all social media with names, and they have a service for law enforcement where if you have a photo, they can give you the name in real time. And so this is actually illegal in Europe. But Belgian law enforcement was using it because that's cheap, but let's test it, okay? So you can hack stuff. You have tools like Predator, Pegasus. There is hundreds of companies. Many are in Israel, but also in the Emirates, but also in Europe. In Europe, we have Hacking Team, the Italians. I love Hacking Team because they were hacked. 47 gigabytes of their data is online, including their tools and their customer database, their invoices. You can see who paid what for every tool. It's all online. I mean, there's fancy stuff online. You can really have a good time on the internet. Hacking Team shut down, but apparently they restarted. It's so good business that they started after a few years, they decided to start again. So NSO Group was also, they said, so they're the ones who found Khashoggi, right, and made sure that the guy was actually cut up in small pieces. So they also got a bad reputation, in particular because they said, oh, but we never do UK, US, or Israel phone numbers. Then they had to admit that they did, and in the end they had to admit that they also listened to Netanyahu, which was really bad. So NSO got on a blacklist. There was an investigation in the European Parliament. It was used by Orban against opposition. It was used by the Spanish government against the Catalonians. So also in the Parliament, there is a fascinating report of 100 pages about who has used it against whom in Europe. So NSO, bad. You know what happened recently? A US company has acquired NSO. So they're still in business. So this is, of course, what law enforcement is doing anyway. Okay, so I think the picture is that law enforcement comes always with their case, but of course you have to look also at what intelligence services do, what other nation states do. You have to look at industrial espionage, organized crime, but also employer relationship, family relationship. I mean, if you start messing with encryption, you affect all these things. And law enforcement always comes with their case and say, look what a problem we have, people are selling drugs, solve it. But you can't take this one problem out and not look at all the other problems you create, right? That's the big problem of the debate. In any case, you may have seen the controversy in the press in the last year. So there is accusations that, or the last days, so that Europol, in the case of EncroChat and ECC, would have kept a lot of data in shadow IT systems which were not reported to supervisory authorities. So of course, what you risk is that Europol is collecting more and more data, and they lobby very heavily with the Commission. Okay? And also, my experiences, I've been talking in many parliaments, if you ask normal police officers, local police officers, they don't ask for all this data because they know it's way too much for them. They just want a few things, a few simple things. Somebody sends WhatsApp messages, they want to be able to contact Meta and find out who it is, right? I mean, somebody is, there's typically somebody local anyway that does that, right? Annoy a child or annoy a neighbor. That's what the police want. They don't want mass access to everything or breaking encryption. So now we're on the fifth crypto war, unfortunately. So the Commission has published a strategy. Irony is actually dead. The Swedish presidency created a working group called Going Dark. So they used the terms of COMI to make a working group in Brussels. I've been there once for 15 minutes. I was allowed to talk about the importance of encryption, then I was shown the door because people who say these kind of things, that encryption is important, they were not so wished in this environment. But more or less, the outcome of this working group is that the Commission has to make a roadmap to access to more data for law enforcement. So the claim is that law enforcement doesn't have enough data. And we have to solve the data retention problem because the Commission is realizing that in the next years, the European Court will block access to indiscriminate metadata. And then I have the fun to serve with 11 other victims. Well, I volunteered for it on a working group, and we are tasked to develop methods, propose methods for access to all encrypted data. And so more or less there is 6 people from law enforcement who keep proposing inventive solutions. I can't talk about it because it's been recorded, but I mentioned some of the things in my talk if you've been paying attention. And then there is 6 academics, industry people, and some people who work for CSIRTs. We say like, this is not a good idea. And so I don't know what's going to happen, but our report will be available in November, but I'm not sure what will be made public. That's another point. Okay, so we're running out of time, but So more or less, the last thing we now see, and I spent too much time already, again, writing letters and going to parliaments, is age verification. So TikTok is, of course, addictive and poisonous, and it's terrible for kids. Social media is terrible for kids. Some websites are terrible for kids. So now we have seen the light. We want to have something like the wallet I discussed on Tuesday, or we want some app for age verification. And now politicians all believe this is a solution. Of course, if you have age verification, you will exclude people without a smartphone because they can't prove that they have an age. You will exclude refugees because they don't have official documents to prove that they're actually over 18. By the way, everybody in the room will have to do age verification because whatever, the age verification is not only for kids, it's for everybody else as well. So of course, in the UK, they have it already, and they've seen that VPN usage has gone up to 40 to 60% of the kids use VPNs. So the next step is then, are we going to ban VPNs or have age verification for the use of VPNs? I mean, it's just a very, very tiring discussion. Okay, we should protect kids, but we should actually fix social media with the DSA and not do age verification. But you can see that either Europe is going to end up with the Great Firewall of Europe, like China, or we're going to have politicians coming to their senses. But more or less my take on this is that politicians, I mean, of course, their voters complain, and Child Focus shouts very hard, and NECMEC and so on. So they want to introduce it because they want to be seen to do something. And they know already it doesn't work. I tell them, they don't want to hear that. They're going to do it anyway. So that's my prediction. So there will be quite some fun. Okay, so time to wrap up. So I do think technology is changing power relationships. We discussed this also on Monday already. Big tech gets more and more power. Law enforcement gets more and more power. They can see everything all the time. Intelligence services and the military. And more or less it harms the social contract we have, because we have a social contract in which citizens also have power. But it seems that the only way to balance this online is use in a clever way cryptography to protect citizens. And so a fight about cryptography is for me actually a fight about power in society. So I'm quite sure that I will spend the next years even more time in Brussels fighting these debates. And for example, the wallet is going to be a very interesting debate, because once you have this, I mentioned it already, the government must put all your data in there for private sector, for public sector, and then use it for age verification. So more or less, we will all have this unique wallet. And the biggest winners will be Google and Apple, because they will see what's happening. Things they don't see for now, they will actually also all have live visibility on everything we're doing. For the things they don't see it, and this even with government-approved data, so they will be sure it's actually correct. So the good news is cryptography can change this, so I'm going to stop here. I hope you had a nice course. I hope you had as much fun as I had. And maybe we see you back in the next edition, 2 or 4 years. For those of you who are from Belgium, we have every week or every 2 weeks a seminar. Actually, Barry's organizing this. You can talk to him if you want to be on the list, the mailing list. We also work a lot with industry on all the topics we discussed this week: hardware, software, cryptography. Our door is open, so we have about 100 researchers. And we collaborate with Distrinet. You saw the people here as well. Also 120 people. And the legal department, you saw Laura on Tuesday. So there is a very strong research group of about 250 researchers, 30 professors and senior staff in the KU Leuven that is always open to collaborate. Thank you very much for your attention. Have a safe trip home.